The image didn't just shock football fans, it stopped them cold. For a split second, everything else disappeared. The score, the weather, the playoff implications, all of it faded into the background. What remained was a tight camera shot broadcast coast to coast, showing something most people were never supposed to see on live television. A rookie quarterback standing on the sideline, eyes locked forward, jaw clenched, and blood running down his throwing hand. Not a scrape, not a bruise, something far worse. So graphic that networks would later be questioned for even letting it air. And in that moment, America wasn't just watching a football game anymore. They were watching a career hang in the balance. That quarterback was Shedeur Sanders, and whether people loved him, doubted him, or had already written him off, none of that mattered anymore, because this wasn't about hype or legacy or who his father was. This was raw, unfiltered, real. A young player fighting for relevance in a league that chews through rookies without remorse, now standing in freezing temperatures with a hand that looked like it didn't belong on a football field. And what happened next would split fans, ignite social media, and quietly expose just how fragile trust really is inside the Cleveland Browns organization. The date mattered. Late December, the season almost over, every snap under a microscope, every mistake magnified. For Shedeur, this wasn't just another game, it was an audition, proof that he deserved more than a clipboard and a depth chart footnote, proof that the doubts were wrong. And early on, it looked like he was delivering exactly that, calm under pressure, precise, confident. Cleveland felt something it hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The dangerous kind, the kind that makes a fan base believe again. But football has a brutal way of punishing optimism, and it never waits for a convenient moment. Because the injury itself wasn't the most controversial part of the night, not even close. What followed revealed something deeper, something uncomfortable. Booing from the stands, confusion on the sidelines, a celebration that crossed a line for some and fueled others. And behind all of it, a growing question that no one wanted to say out loud. Was this just another tough break, or the beginning of something much darker for a quarterback who already felt like he was fighting uphill? By the end of the night, one thing was undeniable. Shedeur Sanders didn't just walk off that field with a bandaged hand. He walked off with the attention of the entire league. Some saw toughness, others saw recklessness. Some saw a future leader, others saw a cautionary tale forming in real time. And as the footage replayed again and again online, one uncomfortable truth lingered in the air. Moments like this don't fade quietly. They either become legend or a warning. And what happened after that injury would decide which one this story was going to become. It happened so fast that most people didn't even realize what they were seeing at first. 1 second, the play was unfolding like any other snap near the goal line. The next, everything stopped. No celebration, no frustration, just Shedeur Sanders pulling his throwing hand in close to his chest and breaking into a sprint toward the sideline. Quarterbacks don't do that unless something is seriously wrong, and the silence that rolled through the stadium said it all. 70,000 people sensed it at the exact same time.
The cameras followed him, because of course they did. This was late December football, and Cleveland finally had something to believe in. As he reached the sideline, trainers rushed toward him, towels appearing almost instantly. At first, it looked routine, a precaution, maybe a jammed finger, maybe a broken nail. But then the towel came away, and the broadcast lingered just a second too long. What viewers saw was shocking enough that many would later say they wish they hadn't. Blood running down his hand, a pinky finger twisted in a way fingers aren't supposed to twist. Some swore they could see more than they should have, enough that sports outlets would later blur the images and fans online would argue about whether the network crossed a line by letting it go out live. Inside the stadium, confusion replaced noise. People stood instead of sat. Conversations died mid-sentence. This wasn't the kind of injury fans are used to seeing quarterbacks shake off. This wasn't a limp or a shoulder grab. This was something that made even seasoned football watchers uncomfortable. On the field, the Bills players backed away, unsure whether to celebrate the stop or respect the moment. On the Browns sideline, urgency took over. Medical staff didn't waste time. They moved fast, too fast for anyone to pretend this was minor. As Sanders disappeared into the tunnel, the weight of the moment hit all at once. Cleveland had waited decades for stability at quarterback. Dozens of names had come and gone, each one promising, each one eventually discarded. And now, just as this rookie was starting to look different, calmer, sharper, more in control, it felt like the football gods were intervening again. The scoreboard still showed a one-score game, but nobody was looking at it anymore. The outcome suddenly felt irrelevant compared to what might have just been lost. And yet, even as the shock settled in, something else was brewing beneath the surface, because this injury didn't just freeze the stadium, it exposed how fragile everything around Shedeur really was. The faith, the patience, the trust between the fans and the organization. And in just a few moments, that tension was about to explode in a way no one inside Huntington Bank Field was prepared for. The moment Shedeur Sanders disappeared into the tunnel, the stadium didn't erupt in concern, it filled with suspicion. Fans craned their necks, staring at the sideline, waiting for clarity that never came. No replay explanation, no official announcement, just a pause. And in Cleveland, pauses are dangerous. They create space for old wounds to resurface, for past betrayals to come rushing back. This fanbase has been conditioned to expect the worst, especially when it comes to quarterback decisions. When the backup jogged onto the field, the reaction was instant. Booing poured down from every corner of the stadium, loud and relentless, drowning out the play call. It wasn't subtle frustration, it was raw anger. Not at the players stepping in, but at what fans believed was happening yet again. Another quarterback pulled too soon, another decision that made no sense, another front office move that felt disconnected from reality. To them, it looked like history repeating itself in real time. From the stands, it didn't look like an injury situation. It looked like a choice, and that distinction mattered. Cleveland fans have lived through years of half-explanations and post-game justifications that never quite lined up. So when Sanders vanished without warning, many assumed the worst, that the coaching staff had lost faith, that they were panicking, that they were sabotaging the one player who had finally shown poise under pressure. None of that was confirmed, but in that moment, perception outweighed facts. The boos weren't about football anymore. They were about trust. Or the lack of it. Trust in leadership, trust in medical transparency, trust that when something good finally shows up, the organization won't find a way to mishandle it. And that's what made the reactions so loud. It wasn't a snap judgment, it was years of frustration boiling over in a single moment. Fans felt like they were watching another promising story get cut short without explanation. What no one in the stadium fully understood yet was that this wasn't a coaching call at all. This wasn't strategy. This wasn't a benching. It was an emergency unfolding behind closed doors. But by the time that truth would become clear, the damage was already done. Because the boos revealed something deeper than confusion. They exposed just how little margin for error this organization had left with its own supporters. And the next moment would flip that anger on its head in a way no one expected. Just when the tension felt unbearable, the tunnel stirred again. At first, people weren't sure what they were seeing. A figure stepped into view, helmet in hand, moving with purpose, and then the realization hit all at once. Shedeur Sanders was coming back. Less than 5 minutes after vanishing with an injury that had made an entire stadium hold its breath, he emerged again. Right hand wrapped in thick white bandaging, pinky completely immobilized, as if sheer willpower were the only thing holding it together. The reaction was instant and electric. The boos evaporated, replaced by a roar that shook the lower bowl. This wasn't approval, this was relief mixed with admiration. Sanders didn't wave, he didn't gesture to the crowd, he didn't ask for validation. He simply grabbed his helmet and headed toward the sideline throwing area, flipping short passes to test his grip. Each throw felt like a statement, not dramatic, not defiant, just deliberate, the kind of quiet message that travels faster than words ever could.
On the broadcast, cameras stayed locked on him because this was the story now. A rookie quarterback, barely established, choosing to re-enter a game in freezing weather with a damaged throwing hand. Analysts stopped talking about schemes and coverages. Social media lit up in real time. Clips of him tossing warm-up passes spread within seconds, framed as proof of toughness by some and recklessness by others. But regardless of where people landed, everyone was watching. When Sanders jogged back onto the field, the atmosphere shifted completely. The same crowd that had turned hostile minutes earlier now stood in unison. Whatever doubts existed about his commitment dissolved in that walk from the sideline to the huddle. He hadn't just returned physically, he'd reclaimed the narrative. This wasn't about a depth chart anymore. It was about resilience, about a player refusing to let a moment like that define him on someone else's terms. But football rarely rewards courage with mercy, and while Cleveland was still riding the emotional high of his return, the game itself was quietly slipping into chaos, because the punishment for staying in the fight was about to arrive from another direction entirely, and it would push this story from dramatic into downright volatile. The emotional lift from Shedeur Sanders returning barely had time to settle before reality crashed back down. Football has a cruel rhythm like that. One moment you're inspired, the next you're reminded how unforgiving the game can be. Not long after Sanders retook the field, Cleveland absorbed another gut punch. A key offensive piece went down hard, staying on the turf long enough for the mood to shift from concern to dread. Trainers rushed out, a cart followed, and just like that, the Browns weren't just fighting Buffalo anymore, they were fighting attrition. As the injured teammate was taken off, the energy drained from the stadium. This was no longer a feel-good comeback story, it was survival football. Sanders stood on the sideline between series, flexing his bandaged hand, shaking it out, trying to convince himself as much as anyone else that it would hold up. Every throw now carried extra weight, every hit felt more dangerous, and across the field, the Bills could sense it. Momentum doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just quietly switches sides. Then came the moment that changed the tone of the entire night. Late in the half, Buffalo found the end zone, and as the Bills celebrated, James Cook did something that instantly lit the fuse. He turned toward the Cleveland crowd and tapped his wrist, the watch celebration, the same gesture that had become synonymous with Shedeur's confidence, his signature, his statement, performed right there in front of fans who had just watched their quarterback bleed, disappear, and fight his way back onto the field. The reaction was immediate. You could feel it even through the broadcast. Gasps, shouts, a sudden surge of noise that had nothing to do with the scoreboard. To some, it looked like standard NFL trash talk, the kind of thing that happens every Sunday. But the timing made it impossible to ignore. This wasn't a random celebration. It felt targeted, personal, and whether that was the intent or not, perception took over instantly. Online, the moment detonated. Clips spread within seconds, slowed down, zoomed in, dissected from every angle. Some fans praised the audacity, calling it ruthless competition. Others labeled it classless, arguing that mocking an injured rookie crossed an unspoken line. The debate wasn't about rules anymore, it was about respect. And for Sanders, it added another layer to a night that was already testing him physically and mentally. Because now, this wasn't just about winning a football game. It wasn't even just about proven toughness. It was about pride, about how a young quarterback responds when he's hurt, doubted, and now openly challenged. And as the noise grew louder and opinions hardened, one thing became clear. This moment was going to follow Shedeur Sanders long after the final whistle. By the time the cameras cut away from the field, the real battle had already shifted somewhere else. Phones were out, clips were uploading, and within minutes, the internet was tearing itself in half. The watch gesture, the bandaged hand, the timing, it all collided into a moment tailor-made for outrage. What happened on that field was no longer just a football play. It had become a cultural flashpoint, and everyone had an opinion. On one side, fans rushed to defend Shedeur Sanders with fierce loyalty. They pointed to the injury, the blood, the return, the grit it took to keep playing. To them, the celebration wasn't competition, it was disrespect. Mocking a rookie while he played through visible pain felt like crossing a line that didn't need to be crossed. Posts flooded timelines calling it classless.
Unnecessary, classless, and emblematic of everything wrong with how young quarterbacks are treated in the league. For these fans, Sanders had earned a level of respect that night, whether the scoreboard reflected it or not. On the other side, just as loud, were those who saw nothing wrong at all. Football is ruthless. Celebrations are part of the game. If you don't want to be mocked, don't give up the score. That was the argument. They framed the gesture as psychological warfare, the same kind that's been happening in the NFL for decades. To them, Sanders choosing to return meant he was fair game. Sympathy had no place between the lines. And if anything, they argued, the moment proved he was being taken seriously at last. Caught in the middle was the clip itself, looping endlessly. Slowed down, zoomed in, paired with dramatic captions and reaction videos. Some accounts framed it as a turning point in Sanders' career. Others used it as fuel to revive old debates about hype, privilege, and whether he'd ever truly be judged on his own merits. The discourse spiraled fast, drifting far beyond the actual facts of the game and into something much bigger: identity, perception, and what toughness is supposed to look like. What made the divide so intense was how symbolic the moment felt. Sanders wasn't just a quarterback anymore. He had become a mirror. People saw what they wanted to see in him: resilience, entitlement, courage, arrogance, sometimes all at once. And while the teams prepared for the second half, the internet was already writing narratives that would follow him long after this game faded from memory. But the truth is, this clash didn't start with a celebration. It didn't start with an injury. It had been building for months, quietly, ever since Sanders entered the league under a microscope. And to understand why this moment hit such a nerve, you have to rewind back to how this story really began. Long before the injury, the celebration, or the internet outrage, Shedeur Sanders was already carrying weight most rookies never have to deal with. His name alone guaranteed attention. Expectations followed him everywhere, loud and unavoidable. Some saw opportunity, others saw entitlement. And from the moment he entered the draft process, the conversation around him felt less like evaluation and more like judgment. Analysts debated his ceiling, questioned his readiness, and dissected his confidence as if it were a flaw rather than a trait. Then came draft night, the first real fracture in the narrative. Projections had placed him near the top. Instead, round after round passed. Phones buzzed. Cameras searched for reactions that never came. When his name was finally called deep into the draft, it wasn't just surprising, it was humiliating by NFL standards. A quarterback once discussed as a franchise cornerstone, now introduced as a late-round experiment. From that moment on, the message was clear. Nothing would be given, and everything would have to be earned the hard way. The uphill climb only got steeper in Cleveland. Sanders didn't arrive to a clean slate or a patient development plan. He arrived to chaos, a crowded quarterback room, a depth chart that buried him before he ever took a meaningful snap. Weeks passed, then months. While injuries and inconsistency shuffled players ahead of him, Sanders stayed on the sideline, helmet on, waiting, watching, listening as commentators questioned whether he was even
ready for the league at all. He didn't respond publicly. No cryptic posts, no excuses. Just silence. Rumors began circulating among fans and insiders, unverified but persistent, that the coaching staff didn't fully trust him, that his confidence rubbed people the wrong way, that his leash would always be shorter than others. None of it was ever confirmed, but perception has a way of shaping reality, especially in a market as restless as Cleveland. And when Sanders finally got his opportunity, it didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like a test. One mistake, and the door could slam shut again. That's what made this moment different. Before the injury, before the chaos, he was playing the cleanest football of his young career. Efficient, composed, in control, not forcing anything, not trying to prove a point, just running the offense. For the first time, it looked like the waiting might have been worth it. And then, in a cruel twist that felt almost scripted, the night demanded another sacrifice. Because this wasn't just about a finger or a celebration anymore. It was about whether the grind, the slide, the silence, the doubt had forged something unbreakable or simply delayed the inevitable. And with the season winding down, the margin for error was gone. What happened next wouldn't just define this game, it could decide whether Shedeur Sanders ever gets another moment like it again. This is where the story stops being emotional and starts becoming dangerous. Because playing through pain is one thing, playing through the wrong kind of injury is something else entirely. For a quarterback, the throwing hand isn't just another body part, it's everything. Grip, spin, touch, confidence. And when that hand is compromised, especially late in the season, the consequences can stretch far beyond one Sunday. For Shedeur Sanders, the concerns stack up fast. Cold weather doesn't forgive injuries. Fingers stiffen, bandages tighten, sensation fades. A pinky might sound insignificant to casual fans, but quarterbacks know better. It anchors grip pressure, it stabilizes the release. Lose control there, and the ball sails, floats, gets picked. Suddenly, a tough decision to stay in the game starts showing up on the stat sheet, and the league is never patient with numbers. Then there's the schedule. What's waiting next isn't mercy, it's division opponents who know exactly how fragile situations like this can be. The Cincinnati Bengals, the Baltimore Ravens, physical defenses, aggressive pass rushes, teams that won't hesitate to test an injured quarterback early and often. Not out of malice, out of strategy. If there's weakness, it gets targeted. That's how this league works. Medical clearance becomes the wild card. Will doctors green light him to play? Will swelling limit motion days later? Will infection risk force a shutdown? None of that is public yet, and speculation online has filled the silence. Some fans believe the injury could quietly end his season. Others worry it could become the perfect justification for the organization to step back from him again, this time with medical cover. Those claims remain unproven, but the fact they're circulating at all says everything about the trust gaps surrounding this situation. And that's the most unsettling part. If Sanders struggles after this, will context matter, or will the narrative flip instantly? Toughness has a short shelf life in the NFL. One week you're praised for grit, the next you're labeled reckless or unreliable. If this gamble backfires, it won't just hurt physically, it could rewrite how decision-makers view him moving forward. That's why this moment feels so heavy, because if it goes right, it becomes a defining chapter, proof of resilience, proof of leadership. But if it goes wrong, it risks turning into something much colder, a cautionary example of how quickly opportunity disappears in this league. And that leaves one final question hanging in the air, unanswered and uncomfortable. Will this night be remembered as the moment Shedeur Sanders arrived, or the moment everything started slipping away? By the time the final whistle blew, the score almost felt secondary. What lingered wasn't the result on the board, it was the image. Shedeur Sanders standing on that field with his throwing hand wrapped, jaw set, eyes forward, refusing to disappear. For some, that image already feels iconic. The night a late-round rookie stopped playing the role assigned to him and forced the league to look closer. The night toughness stopped being a talking point and became visible, undeniable. There's a version of this story that gets told for years. The game people point to and say, that's when it changed. When Sanders stopped being a question mark and started being a leader. When a franchise starved for stability finally found someone willing to endure the chaos instead of folding under it. In that version, the injury becomes mythology, the mockery becomes fuel, and this night becomes the foundation of something bigger than one season. But there's another version too, and it's harder to ignore. The one NFL fans know all too well. The promising quarterback who gave everything too early. The organization that failed to protect its own investments. The moment that should have been a warning sign, brushed aside in the name of grit. In that version, the footage doesn't symbolize resilience, it symbolizes risk. A reminder that courage doesn't always get rewarded in this league. Right now, the story hasn't chosen which path it's on. That's what makes it so powerful.
The injury will heal, the debate will cool, but the consequences of this night will stretch forward, shaping decisions that haven't been made yet. Who starts next week? Who gets protected? Who gets patience? And who gets blamed if things go sideways? What's certain is this: Shedeur Sanders walked into that stadium as a rookie fighting for respect. He walked out as someone impossible to ignore. Teammates saw it, fans felt it, opponents acknowledged it, whether they meant to or not. And in a league built on survival, that matters more than any stat line. Whether this becomes a legend or a warning story won't be decided by one injury or one celebration. It will be decided by what happens next and how quickly the league forgets or remembers. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not like this, not this fast, and definitely not from someone who barely touched the field. Because what just dropped has the NFL scrambling, the Browns looking uncomfortable, and a lot of people suddenly very quiet. A rookie quarterback with almost no playing time just forced his way into a conversation the league usually controls from the top down. Here's the part nobody can explain away. This wasn't a media push, it wasn't a coach-backed campaign, and it wasn't some feel-good storyline built off hype alone. This came straight from the fans, the same fans who watch every snap, argue every Sunday, and don't care about protecting narratives. When the latest Pro Bowl voting results came out, one name sat in a spot that made absolutely no sense on paper, and that's exactly why it matters. Because this isn't about a rookie being liked, it's about a rookie being undeniable. Someone who was benched, limited, and barely given a window suddenly showed up where only established stars are supposed to live. No full season, no long leash, no organizational push, and yet there he was, staring down quarterbacks who've been handed the keys for years. That's when the conversation shifted. Quietly at first, then all at once. Fans started asking questions the league doesn't love answering. How does someone with so little opportunity break through like this? What does that say about the system that tried to slow him down? And why does it feel like this result caught way too many people off guard? Because once you see where Shedeur Sanders landed and who he landed next to, you realize this wasn't luck, this was momentum, and what happened next is what really shook the league. The moment the Pro Bowl quarterback rankings went public, everything changed. No build-up, no warning, just a list that immediately made people stop scrolling and read it twice. Sitting at number 10 was a name that shouldn't have been there, at least not according to the usual NFL logic. Shedeur Sanders, top 10 in the entire league. Let that sink in for a second. This wasn't a rookie-only list. This wasn't backups. This wasn't some fan poll buried on a website. This was official Pro Bowl voting, stacking Shedeur against every starting quarterback in the NFL, veterans, franchise faces, MVP candidates, and somehow a quarterback with barely any starts had climbed past dozens of established names to land right there in the top 10. That's why this hits so hard, because on paper it makes no sense. Pro Bowl voting usually rewards longevity, exposure, and weekly highlights. You're supposed to earn your way in after months of primetime games, not after a handful of appearances. Yet there Shedeur was, outranking quarterbacks who've been on the field 3 times longer, leading playoff teams, and dominating media coverage all season. Even wilder, this wasn't close. He didn't sneak in at the bottom of some obscure metric. He landed firmly inside the top tier of fan voting, forcing everyone to confront a reality they weren't ready for. The fans didn't hesitate. They didn't wait for permission. They saw something they liked, and they voted accordingly.
And once people realized this ranking was real, not a glitch or a typo, the reaction spread fast. Analysts went quiet. Comment sections exploded, and a single question started circulating everywhere. How does someone with so little playing time end up here? Because when you look at the quarterbacks ranked above him, the situation only gets more unbelievable. Then you look at the names surrounding him, and that's when the situation stops being surprising and starts feeling unreal. The quarterbacks ranked above Shedeur Sanders aren't just good players. They're the faces of franchises, full-season starters.
guys whose teams have been built around them from day one. At the top of the list are quarterbacks who started every game, taken every first-team rep, and been handed complete control of their offenses. MVP candidates, Super Bowl winners, players with years of trust, protection, and patience behind them. These are the quarterbacks the league promotes, the ones featured in commercials, the ones analysts debate every week. And right there, shoulder to shoulder with them, is Shedeur Sanders. Here's the contrast that makes this so hard to ignore. Every quarterback above him had double-digit starts. Most of them had 12, 14, even full seasons under center. They had time to build chemistry, recover from bad games, pad their stats, and settle into rhythm. Shedeur didn't have any of that. No long runway, no margin for error, just a few chances, spaced out, and often under chaotic circumstances. Yet, despite all of that, fans still placed him in the same tier, not because of reputation, not because of projections, but because when he did play, it stuck. The throws stood out, the composure stood out, the confidence stood out. Enough that fans were willing to rank him alongside quarterbacks who've been household names for years. That's what makes this ranking so disruptive. It collapses the usual hierarchy. It ignores seniority. It ignores draft position. It ignores how the league prefers stories to unfold. And instead, it asks one uncomfortable question. If he did this with almost no opportunity, what would have happened if he actually had one? And that's where the story really starts to get uncomfortable for the people who controlled his situation. This is where the numbers and the context collide, because Shedeur didn't climb into the top 10 with a full season of tape or a perfectly tailored system. He did it with scraps, limited starts, inconsistent preparation, and a situation that, according to multiple reports, was anything but stable. He started just 4 games. 4. No extended runway, no weekly rhythm, no luxury of learning through mistakes on Sundays. While other quarterbacks were building chemistry over months, Shedeur was bouncing between the bench and the spotlight, often thrown in without the same level of preparation. There were reports that during his debut, the plays on his wristband didn't even match what was being called. Whether you believe every detail or not, the bigger point is clear. This wasn't a smooth transition.
And still, when he finally got on the field, he produced. Over 1,000 passing yards in those limited starts, tight window throws that forced defenders to respect his accuracy, calm footwork under pressure that didn't look rushed or panicked. He didn't play like someone just trying to survive. He played like someone who belonged there. The Tennessee game was the moment a lot of people stopped making excuses. 4 touchdown passes, command of the offense, control of the huddle. Not perfect, but confident. Not reckless, but assertive. He extended plays when protection broke down, used his legs when he had to, and made reads that rookies aren't supposed to make under pressure. What stood out most wasn't just the stats, it was how comfortable he looked doing it. No visible panic, no wide-eyed hesitation, just poise. Teammates responded to it, fans picked up on it, and once people saw that level of efficiency coming from someone with almost no margin for error, the narrative started slipping out of the league's hands. Because if this is what he looked like with almost nothing, the next question became impossible to ignore. Was this lack of opportunity really about development, or something else entirely? That question is where things start getting uncomfortable, especially in Cleveland, because once fans began putting the pieces together, a different conversation took over. One built less on stats and more on opportunity, or the lack of it. And while nothing has ever been officially admitted, the speculation hasn't slowed down. Look at the contrast people keep pointing out. Other rookie quarterbacks were handed the offense early, full weeks of first-team reps, systems adjusted to fit their strengths, time to fail, learn, and grow in real time. Shedeur didn't get that. He watched from the sideline while veterans struggled. He practiced without consistent chemistry, and when his number was finally called, it often felt rushed and reactive rather than planned.
Some fans and analysts have openly wondered whether the Browns were ever truly committed to giving him a real chance this season. Reports have floated around suggesting the staff didn't see him as ready, while others believe the team was more focused on justifying earlier decisions than evaluating what was actually happening on the field. None of that is proven, but the timing fuels the questions. Because here's what's hard to ignore. When Shedeur did play, the offense looked sharper. The ball came out quicker. Receivers seemed more engaged, and the mistakes you expect from a rookie didn't spiral into chaos. That's why so many people now look back at those weeks he spent on the bench and ask what exactly the team was waiting for. It's not an accusation, it's a curiosity that refuses to go away. Was this really about patience and development, or did the Browns hesitate because admitting they had something special would force bigger changes than they were ready to make? And just as that question started gaining traction, the story shifted again, this time away from Cleveland and straight into the hands of the fans. That's when the power dynamic flipped, because once the fans got involved, the usual NFL script stopped working. This wasn't analysts shaping opinion or teams guiding the narrative.
Conversation. This was raw fan response, and it didn't line up with the narrative that had been pushed for months. Insiders and longtime observers started calling the moment something you almost never see anymore: organic. No PR machine, no weekly hype segments, just people watching the games and voting with their attention. One insider reaction that made the rounds summed it up perfectly, calling the whole situation legendary. Not because of hype, but because of how impossible it should have been. And that's the part the league doesn't love. Pro Bowl voting is one of the few spaces where fans can directly challenge the hierarchy. No depth charts, no coach speak, no draft status, just a simple question: who do you want to see? And a lot of people answered with the same name. As this gained traction, speculation naturally followed. Some fans began wondering out loud whether Shedeur's final placement truly reflected where he finished in raw votes. Nothing proven, nothing confirmed, just curiosity fueled by how disruptive this result already was. A rookie with limited starts climbing too high too fast creates a problem for the usual storylines. Because if fans are telling you they believe this quarterback belongs among the league's elite, it forces uncomfortable admissions, it challenges evaluations, it puts front office decisions under a spotlight, and it raises a bigger issue the NFL rarely wants to deal with: what happens when fan perception completely breaks away from institutional messaging? And just when that tension peaked, one comparison sent everything into overdrive and pushed this debate far beyond Cleveland. That comparison hit like a shockwave as the vote totals circulated online. Fans noticed something that immediately lit up social media. Shedeur Sanders didn't just crack the top 10, he reportedly pulled in more Pro Bowl votes than quarterbacks who had been starting all season long. Think about what that actually means. While other rookies were taking every snap, leading teams into playoff conversations, and getting non-stop national exposure, Shedeur was spending half the year on the bench. Fewer games, fewer highlights, fewer chances to stay top of mind. And yet, when fans were asked who they wanted to see, they chose him anyway. One name kept coming up in those comparisons, and it made the situation even harder to explain. A full-season starter, a rookie widely praised for stability and leadership, a quarterback whose team was winning. And still, Shedeur's vote total was higher, not by accident, not by a technicality, but because fans clearly felt a stronger pull toward what they saw when he played. This isn't about tearing anyone else down. Multiple young quarterbacks are having solid seasons, but popularity at this level doesn't come from box scores alone. It comes from moments, from confidence, from the feeling that something different happens when the ball is in someone's hands. And that's the reaction Shedeur triggered in a very short window.
That's why this result rattled people. It suggested that excitement, not just availability, drives attention. That fans are willing to overlook limited playing time if the impact feels real. And once that realization set in, it exposed a deeper irony that no one could ignore. Because the same organization that limited his chances was suddenly benefiting from the spotlight he created. That's where the irony reached its peak.
The Cleveland Browns, the same organization that spent months keeping Shedeur Sanders on the sidelines, suddenly had no choice but to acknowledge him publicly. Once the Pro Bowl rankings went live, the momentum was too big to ignore, and the fans had made their message impossible to spin away. The Browns posted the updated Pro Bowl fan vote rankings on their official social media accounts. Not a vague mention, not a quiet nod, a full list. And right there, alongside established defensive stars and longtime leaders, was Shedeur Sanders, sitting at number 10 among all NFL quarterbacks. The organization that hesitated to hand him the offense was now promoting his league-wide recognition. That moment didn't go unnoticed. Fans immediately pointed out how fast the tone shifted. Weeks of cautious language suddenly gave way to celebration graphics and countdown reminders to keep voting. It wasn't about development anymore. It wasn't about waiting. The numbers spoke louder than any press conference ever could. Comment sections filled up fast. Some fans celebrated the validation. Others didn't hide their frustration. And that split reaction only highlighted the pressure the organization was under. When fan support reaches this level, silence isn't an option. The Browns had to engage, whether they were comfortable with it or not. What made it even more striking was how unavoidable it felt. This wasn't a storyline the team created, it was one they inherited. And once the official accounts posted that ranking, the debate moved from speculation to reality. Shedeur wasn't just a topic anymore, he was a verified top 10 vote-getter in the entire league. And that acknowledgement cracked the door open to something even more revealing, the growing divide between national support and the loudest local critics. That divide became impossible to miss. As the rankings spread, the reaction wasn't just praise, it was noise, loud and emotional, and often coming from places you wouldn't expect. Some of the harshest pushback didn't come from rival fan bases or national media, it came from inside the Browns' own community. Scroll through the comments and you see it instantly, a small but vocal group dismissing the ranking, questioning how we even made the list, calling it embarrassing. Not analysis, not critique, just frustration. And the more visible Shedeur's support became, the louder that resistance got. But here's the part that matters. Noise isn't numbers, and numbers don't lie. For every angry comment, there were thousands of silent votes coming in from across the country. Fans with no loyalty to Cleveland, no stake in local media debates, just people
watching football and responding to what they saw. That's how Shedeur ended up here in the first place. Not because everyone agreed, but because enough people did. This is what often gets lost in online outrage. The loudest voices feel dominant, but they rarely represent the majority. The bigger picture tells a different story. National support, cross-team interest, viewers tuning in specifically to see what he'll do next. That kind of attention doesn't come from arguments, it comes from belief. And whether critics like it or not, this moment is already locked in. The votes are real, the ranking is official, and it's now part of the record. You can argue about readiness, you can argue about opportunity, but you can't erase what happened when fans were given the chance to decide for themselves. Which leaves one final question hanging in the air. If this is what Shedeur Sanders did with almost no runway, what happens when he finally gets one? And that's why this moment is bigger than a number on a list, bigger than a Pro Bowl ranking, bigger than a single season. Because once something like this happens, it can't be undone. No revision, no spin, no walking it back. Shedeur Sanders is now officially on record as one of the most fan-supported quarterbacks in the entire NFL, and he did it under the least favorable conditions possible. This wasn't handed to him, it was taken, earned through flashes, efficiency, and presence in the few moments he was allowed to show it. The fans didn't vote for potential, they voted for what they actually saw. Calm under pressure, confidence without fear, a quarterback who looked comfortable when the moment got heavy. And that's what makes this so uncomfortable for the league and so fascinating for everyone else, because this ranking forces questions that don't go away when the season ends. What if the opportunity had come sooner? What if the offense had been built around him? What if the evaluation process got it wrong? Those questions will linger. They'll follow training camp. They'll show up in every quarterback decision moving forward. And no matter how the narrative shifts, this moment will always be there as proof that fans saw something before they were supposed to. This wasn't supposed to happen, but it did. And now the league has to deal with what comes next. The image didn't just shock football fans. It stopped them cold. For a split second, everything else disappeared. The score, the weather, the playoff implications, all of it faded into the background. What remained was a tight camera shot broadcast coast to coast, showing something most people were never supposed to see on live television. A rookie quarterback standing on the sideline, eyes locked forward, jaw clenched, and blood running down his throwing hand. Not a scrape, not a bruise, something far worse. So graphic that networks would later be questioned for even letting it air. And in that moment, America wasn't just watching a football game anymore. They were watching a career hang in the confident. Cleveland felt something it hadn't felt in a long time. Hope.